I was so excited when you guys reached out to me. I know this is a very difficult topic, but I also know there's so many people who are experiencing the loss of a child, and you guys wrote a whole book on it. So let's start off by having you just introduce yourselves. And I would love for you to share a little bit about your daughter, Ethne, like who she was, what you loved about her, and what you want people to know about her. So let's start with Lawrence. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah. So, Lawrence Stone, Melissa and I, we met when we were going to college. We're going to school up at BYU, Idaho. I'm actually a East Idaho native, grew up just a little bit north of Rexburg in a town called St. Anthony. And Ethne was our oldest daughter. She was born while we were still both students. We were both studying music, and she really got to know a lot of the students in the music department. She became a very special part of that. After graduating, we moved down to Utah, where Melissa was doing her student teaching. And a little while later, when Ethne was 2, Melissa was in a car accident. She was T-boned by a cement truck, and she barely survived the car accident herself. Both her and Ethne were taken by life flight helicopter to the hospital, to Primary Children's and University of Utah Hospital. And our other son, our oldest son Edward, who was about 7 months old at the time, he was also taken by ambulance to Primary Children's. And he also survived the accident, checked out of the hospital the next day, almost like nothing had happened.
Oh my goodness.
And we at some point decided we wanted to have more kids, and so we had another son, and he was actually born with something called Hirschsprung's disease, which is a life-threatening illness. And basically what it is he couldn't poop, long story short, and he had to have a couple of surgeries by the time he was 6 months old to help to remove part of his colon. And then after that, we had a daughter, and then we got pregnant again with another son, Thomas, who was born still at around 18, 20 weeks. And so we've had this idea of writing this book about sharing our stories and our experiences to help people dealing with child loss, and especially with couples, because we know that going through something that big and that tragic can really make or break a marriage. And as soon as Ethne died, I determined that this was not going to break our marriage. And so what we did to hold on to each other, and really the learning process of us needing to grieve differently, our experiences and what we needed in order to be able to work through it were very different, but we still needed the support of each other in order to be able to get through that.
Yeah. You guys have been through a lot, and I appreciate you guys taking your grief and your pain and helping other people through that. That's really admirable. So thank you for doing that and welcome. Melissa, I'd love to hear about you and kind of your thoughts and story as well.
Yeah, so I'm a Utah native. I grew up in West Jordan, Utah. And one thing to mention is that we met at Walmart, and that's his favorite joke to tell people. If you can find anything at Walmart. Yeah.
I love that.
Lawrence gives the short of it. And I had always wanted to be a mom. And, when we were first married, I kind of told him I wanted to wait, get my education done. And shortly after we were married, it became pretty apparent that I didn't want to wait. And so we got pregnant with SB not quite a year after we got married. And through the pregnancy, like it was an easy pregnancy. And I could tell that she was going to be kind of spunky. She was a redhead. So everything that comes with the whole redhead thing was very, very true of her. She was very feisty.
Hmm.
But the thing that jumped out about Esty the most is that she loved everyone. She would hug anyone, she would go to anyone, she would let anyone hold her, and she loved to love people and people, and sharing her stories is part of our way of continuing to share the love that she had to give.
I love that. Thank you so much. So let's start off. I would love to hear from each of you, and maybe we'll start off with you, Melissa. Could you share what surprised you most about how differently each of you grieved? Because I think this is a concept you talk about in your book as well, too.
Um, I I kind of withdrew. I went in on myself, and part of that was that I had a very big physical recovery that I had to go through too. And I feel like I almost had to recover
Yeah.
physically before I could recover emotionally and spiritually in a lot of ways. And Lawrence didn't have that. And so I don't think that he had to deal with that in the same way that I did. I know he didn't. And I, like I said, I kind of withdrew. I've become a lot more introverted since losing FD. Um, and it was hard for me. It's still hard for me to kind of talk through my grief with Lauren. Um, but at the same time, I needed community and support. And I'm a people pleaser. And so when people came to me shortly after the accident and said, you need to go to counseling, I tried it. I saw a counselor through LDS Social Services, and nothing against her. I'm sure she was a wonderful counselor, but she wasn't the right fit for me. And it just it felt like I was kind of hitting my head against a wall when I would go to counseling. I only saw her a few times, but the University of Utah puts on groups for different situations, and one of the groups they put on is groups for parents who have lost children. And I decided to go to that group, and that was actually really beneficial for both of us. Lawrence didn't want to go with me, um, but I convinced him to go, and I think in the end he wound up being really grateful that he went. But getting kind of that community, seeing these other women who experienced it as well, and kind of feeling like there wasn't any judgment, any kind of stigma, because that was something that also weighed really heavily on me, was the stigma of I was the mom who couldn't keep her child alive, who couldn't protect her child. And so that community and those other women, hearing their experiences and the things that they were feeling that I was also feeling really helped.
Grief support groups through University of Utah are amazing. And any grief support group, I feel like you can relate with other people and this can be helpful. All right, Lawrence, would you like to share a little bit about for you kind of how you grieve differently than Melissa and what that experience was for you? Because I think it's true when you experienced it differently, Melissa. You were physically recovering from that. So I'm sure that was very different for you, Lawrence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because what I found was working for me right away. I really wanted Melissa to do to try to help her out. And it was not working for her for multiple reasons. And part of it was because of her physical recovery and she had a traumatic brain injury. And what worked for me that first night, I stayed up pretty much all night journaling. And it's interesting because Melissa talks about how she kind of introverted more. She was already somewhat of an introvert, but it kind of became amplified. But at the same time, Melissa really needed to talk about things. And I was not interested in talking about anything. But I was also the very social one. And so I was still the one going out and talking to people about what we were doing and funeral plans and things of that nature. But specific stuff related to my grief, I was not interested in talking to anyone about, not even Melissa. And the times that we would talk about it, she really had to work hard to get me to sit down and talk to her. Usually our talks were me listening to her, but having that meditation time and that journaling was really therapeutic for me. I kind of look at journaling as we have these things we're trying to figure out in life, and it's like random puzzle pieces. And when I'm journaling, all of a sudden those puzzle pieces come together and create the clear picture. And so I spent a lot of time journaling. Melissa's aunt started a blog for us that we could post on. I started posting on that blog, and for the first year or two, I posted a lot of ideas, and it really helped me process a lot of things and figure a lot of things out. And the nice thing about that for me is I really learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the spirit world and life after death, and there's just a lot of things that I really figured out that I hadn't contemplated before. I tell people that those first couple months after Anthony's passing were probably the most revelation-filled months of my life, just because of all that discovery. And and Melissa talked about going to the grief group, and I was very much not interested in going and sitting in a group of people and crying over the loss of my daughter and expressing my emotions. Like, I didn't want to do that with Melissa, let alone in front of a bunch of strangers. But it was important for Melissa to go, and I know that if I didn't go, she wouldn't go. And part of it was because she wasn't ready to start driving yet. But even if I were just to take her and drop her off and then come back and pick her up, she wasn't going to stick around past the first week. And it was interesting when we were in this group, all the other women there, because I was the only man other than the guy who was heading up the group, who had also lost a son. So other than him, it was just all women in the group. And all these women, I noticed every week, at least one, if not all of them sometimes, would state that their husbands said they're going to try to come next week, and their husbands might come next week. And you could just see how disappointing it was for all these women that their husbands never came. Even the second to last week, they all said, he said he's going to come for the last week. He said he's going to come for the final week. So I expected to meet all these husbands on the last week. None of them came. And watching that with these other women really ingrained to me that even though I didn't want to be there, I didn't feel the need to be there. The fact that I was there supporting Melissa became very beneficial to her in her grief journey. And that more than anything is why I'm glad I went. And it was a good experience. There were certainly some experiences I did need to have. And I won't lie, I did cry in front of everyone, even though I didn't want to, and I thought I could get away with it. I tried hard not to. But it was a good experience, and it was especially important that Melissa was there.
Oh, I love that. Showing up for each other in the way that you each needed to be able to grieve. I run grief support groups in my little community here, and sometimes people are like, "Well, I'll come for you. I'll come to support you." And then they end up getting the most out of it because they're there and they're listening, and it's just a community is really helpful in that grief process. So Lawrence, for couples, we want to support, like you said, we want to support each other. But sometimes when we go to support each other, we can unintentionally create this distance in the relationship because we're supporting in a way that maybe isn't helpful. Do you want to kind of touch on that and what you learned about what things create distance when we're supporting each other?
Yeah, like I say, for me, journaling became so important that I kept telling Melissa, you need to journal. I want you to read what I wrote about and see what you think about it. And I want you to journal. And I even read a lot of books. I was right about that time in my life, just before the accident. Within the last couple of years, I started reading more, and I was more into personal development and growth. And I was starting to read all these books. And it was interesting. The books I was connecting with were definitely different than the books that Melissa would eventually connect with. But because of her brain injury, reading and writing was very difficult for her. And I didn't understand this. I don't even know if she quite understood it at the time. But she talks about it in the book about how she couldn't concentrate for long periods of time in order to be able to read and write. And so my pushing that on her, it was frustrating to me because she would do it, but she wouldn't really do it, and it wasn't helping her. And I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't helping her because it was doing so well for me and helping me out so
Right.
much. We had those moments here and there where she would try to sit me down and get me to talk about things, and I just didn't want to talk about things. I think it was a couple years after the accident, or maybe it was Ethne's birthday, when I finally did sit down and I mentioned to her that I was forgetting what Ethne sounded like. And that was terrifying to me. And she was able to find some videos on her phone of Ethne talking and doing things. And that became really important to me. And so even though I didn't want to do that, that push, I think helped us grow a little bit closer. But you got to find that balance. She knew not to push me too much, but if there was an opportunity or a moment available, she was watching for it.
So really not pushing what's working for you, but looking what's working for the other person and helping support them where they're at in that.
Yeah.
Melissa, did you want to add anything to that about what unintentionally creates that distance in allowing other people to grieve?
One of the things that I really struggled with after losing Ethne was wanting to have more children. And I was really afraid that that was going to push Lawrence away when I told him how I was feeling about that. And it wasn't anything that I was intentionally doing, but I knew he needed to know. And so I kind of put off telling him and sometimes putting off those hard conversations to create a little bit of distance. And when I finally did tell him, he was pretty understanding and pretty supportive. And he said, I understand. I don't think that that's the right decision to make right now. And let's revisit this later.
I love that. Yeah, really, it is hard to have some of those tough conversations, right? And be able to share some of those things. But I love how you support each other where you're at and really just meeting that person where they're at. So,
Can I comment a
Melissa,
little bit more on that?
yeah,
Sorry. Yeah.
absolutely.
So it's interesting. When Melissa talked about how we got pregnant, I think it was probably about 10 months after we'd been married. When we were dating, we were talking about how long we wanted to wait to have kids. And my thought was a year. Like I was like, we can wait a year, then we'll start getting ready to have kids. And Melissa said like 2 to 3 years. And rather than argue with her, I knew her enough when we were dating that she was going to get baby hungry because she was already starting to feel that pinch a little bit, even when we were engaged. And I was like, I'll wear her down to a year. And then like 5 or 6 months into the marriage, she's like, I think I'm ready to have a baby. And I said, well, wait a minute. I had a year plan going on here. And so I knew that Melissa would come back to the fact that she would want to have a baby at some point. And I could tell when she came to me and she finally said that she was done having kids, I could also tell that she was ready to fight me on this. And I knew it wasn't worth having a fight because I knew at some point she might be changing her mind. And so
Mhm.
it was kind of I understand where you're coming from. we're going to come back to this when you're in a frame of mind that you're willing to hear what I have to say about it. And I'm not, and I said, I'm not saying we're going to have more kids. I'm not saying we're not going to have more kids. I'm just saying we need to revisit this at some point in the future when we can actually have a conversation about it. And we tabled that discussion until a later date when we were able to have it, and when we were both honestly in a better frame of mind.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Recognizing when someone might just be talking and wanting to express their pain versus this isn't a time to make decisions, right? Like we can talk about, talk about that and how you're feeling, but we don't have to make a decision on that right now. So, Melissa, maybe you can kind of start with this one. How did you learn to show up for each other without trying to fix each other's pain?
Since we were pretty early in our marriage, there was this YouTube video that we watched. There's this woman who has a nail in her head, and she's venting to her partner, her husband, whoever it is, about how much her head hurts and the headache that she has and how awful it is. And he keeps looking at her like, well, maybe if you just take that nail out of your head, you'll feel better. You just need to take that nail out. And she keeps going, well, it's not about the nail. It's that I just want to talk. I just need someone to listen to me. And that has kind of become a mantra of sorts in our marriage. When I just need to vent, I'll say, it's not about the nail, and he just listens. And so kind of knowing when to offer that help versus when to just listen. And Lawrence is really, really good at that. Sometimes I think sometimes he worries he's not, but he is. He's really good at just listening when I need to just talk, and giving advice when I need advice. And so just kind of knowing when to listen and when to talk. And sometimes it was just being together and letting me cry, because there are still days I just need to cry. We're actually coming up on the 14th anniversary next Friday, and I looked at Lawrence the other day and I said it's hitting me in a different way than it's hit me before. And she said, yeah, I can tell. And he's just there when I need him to be there.
That can be really hard because grief comes up in unexpected ways sometimes, right? There's no predictable way with grief to say, okay, well, we've passed this milestone, we've done this, or I've grieved this part, so I'll never have to experience that again. But grief is so hard in that way; it just comes back around. And I really love what you're saying about having this kind of language with, I don't. I don't need you to fix me. Just let me vent right now. Let me express my pain. Let me tell you how I'm feeling without you having to fix me or fix the situation. There really is it, power in being able to share and have someone validate your experience. That is the helpful thing to do, right? We don't have to come up with a solution to fix it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Melissa. Lawrence, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's just a guy thing is we want to find the solution. And it's frustrating because sometimes Melissa asks how I can help her, and it'll frustrate me because the answer she'll give me is, well, you can bring Anthony back or you can bring Thomas back. And that's obviously something that I cannot do. And so when she tells me that I need to do something that's impossible, that's a struggle for me. And so we had to kind of figure that out as well, and watch out for that. But what we've kind of done and what I've discovered is when I'm more prone to listen to her, then she's even more prone to ask me my thoughts or my opinions. And for a while, I would even come back to her and say, well, do you want to know what I think? And sometimes she'd say yes right away. Sometimes she'd say no. Sometimes she'd think about it and come back later. But I'd ask her if she was interested in that. And if she wasn't, then I just let it go. And if she was, then I'd talk about it a little bit more. And anymore, I don't even really need to ask her that much anymore. She'll actually vent to me, and then she'll ask me my thoughts occasionally. And so I find that as we progress through that she started to understand that I'm only willing to offer as long as she's interested. And because of that, I feel like she's become more interested in the things that I have to say, the things that I have to offer, because she knows I'm willing to listen.
Yeah. This is a question on here, so you guys totally don't have to answer this, but I'm curious because you brought up, you know, learning as you go. When you went through the experience of losing Thomas, do you feel like the grief process was different because you guys had learned kind of some of these patterns and how each other might process your pain differently?
It's interesting for me. In some regards, it was more frustrating than the first time because, and maybe it's because I'm not the one who carries the baby, and because Melissa was the one that carried it. Obviously, I was grieving, and I was distraught, and I was upset. But it felt like Melissa just had completely regressed back
Mm,
to where she was after Ethne died, and she was angry with God. She didn't want to go to church again. She didn't want to pray or read scriptures. Like we would say prayers as a couple for the first few months. I was the only one saying them because she just was angry and upset enough, and her grief so much that she couldn't do it. For me, I mean, there was a lot of grief there, but when Ethne died, I felt like it took a couple years before I really got to hit some of my grief because I was so focused on helping Melissa with her physical recovery and helping her with her grief that there were certain things that my mind couldn't start processing until I knew she was in a safer spot.
yeah.
And I think it was kind of the same thing with Thomas, is I couldn't really hit some of my grief on that because Melissa had regressed immediately into that. And I just had to revert back to, I need to help Melissa get into a safer spot. And it was just that much more frustrating to know that I was in that position again. And it's interesting because again, even after Thomas died, Melissa came to me and said, "I'm done." And again, I was fine with that. I was actually kind of thinking the same thing, but I also knew that at some point she might change her mind. And so even that conversation we had to come back to again at some point. And and we did eventually have another son after Thomas died, even too. But
Yeah.
it was I felt a lot more frustrated because I was like, we just gone through all this, we just got into stable ground, and we're starting all over again. And and it was interesting. I felt like we got through the grief process certainly faster than we did with Ethne. And it's like we tell people in the book too. It's not that your grief ever goes away. It's that you learn how to deal with it better. And I felt like we learned how to deal with it faster, certainly than we did with Ethne, but it was at some moments definitely more frustrating for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's like Lawrence said. After Thomas, I felt very let down by God because I had spent the last few years telling God, I can't handle even a miscarriage. I can't handle a stillbirth. Please don't give me this trial again. And here I was in the middle of it again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did kind of take some big steps backwards. And again, it was that he was there patiently holding my hand, wiping my tears, letting me cry all over his tithe in the temple, um, and just allowing me the space that I needed to process.
Grief is so different, right? And every experience, I love that you guys are bringing up like every experience that we have brings different grief too, right? And added layers and different emotions and different things with that. And I just love how you guys are talking about just meet each other where you're at. What you're experiencing is fine, right? And we don't need to push people into a different experience or to make you have my experience or that you should be farther along. Just allow people to be where they're at. And that helped you guys process that grief differently and move through that.
I when our second son or third child was in the NICU and going through all of his stuff, I felt like I was kind of more as a strong one that I kind of carried Lawrence along a little bit. There were times after Ethne and after Thomas that I felt like Lawrence was dragging me along, kicking and screaming. And I don't think he ever got to the kicking and screaming point when our son was sick and in the NICU. But I feel like there were times when I was kind of
Yeah.
shouldering more of that for him and times when he was shouldering more of it for me.
Yeah. And allowing that trade-off, right? It sounds like you guys were honoring that and respectful of that.
Yeah.
I know that there are people listening to this episode who might be right in the beginning of their grief journey, right? They're feeling alone, they're feeling unsure, they don't know what to do. I would love for each of you to maybe talk to that person that's listening to this. Melissa, can we start with you and just talk to the person that's going through this and is at the beginning of their grief journey?
There are going to be days when you're not going to want to get out of bed And there are going to be days when you're going to feel like you're king of the world, and you kind of have to ride those waves and let the days come and be prepared for that. And the other big thing that you need to learn to do is to accept help. People are going to want to help. They're going to want to comfort you in the ways that they know how to comfort you. And sometimes it may not be the way that you need to receive comfort, but it's comforting for them to help you in a way that they know how. And it's hard to let that go and to accept that help sometimes. But letting go of your own pride and letting people help you will actually, in the long run, really make the grief easier to bear.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Lawrence, would you like to share what you would tell that person listening?
Interesting when you're, and especially I would talk more to the couple that's married, the couple that's going through
Mm.
loss, assuming that they're doing it together. That it is very true that a loss is going to make or break your marriage. And when you're in that early stages, you need to have that dedication. You need to have that mindset. You need to be telling yourself, this is not going to break my marriage. This is going to unite us. We're going to have a stronger marriage going forward. And I've known of people who have dealt with losses that were possibly heading towards divorce before the accident, and somehow it strengthened them and united them.
Yeah.
And that tragedy can really bring you together if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to support each other and meet each other where you are. And one of the things I share in the book is my grandparents lost a son, a 5-year-old, in an accident with a tractor. And I knew someone whose son had died right after he'd gotten home from his mission. And when they went to his funeral, my grandmother went to the funeral of this boy because it was a friend of theirs, the family was. The dad asked my grandmother, when does the pain go away? And my grandmother very wisely said, she said it doesn't, but you learn how to cope with it. And you need to understand that. And people who haven't dealt with loss aren't going to understand that. They're going to criticize you in 6 months or in a year or in 2 years that you're still dealing with that grief and you should be over it. And they're wrong. They don't understand. You shouldn't be over it, but you should be getting stronger. I mean, this is my grandmother was saying this almost 50 years after she had lost her son.
Yeah.
That it wasn't that the grief had gone away, it's that she had become stronger. You have the capability and the ability to become stronger as well. So just keep pushing forward, keep praying, keep doing the things you know you're supposed to be doing, and get the right people involved in your life that'll help you through it as well. And if you're married, hang on to that person that you're married to help you get through it as well. Do it together.
I love that. Set that intention, right? Thank you, both of you, for vulnerably sharing your story. I know this is not easy, and I think I love that you guys wrote a book about it to share your experience. Would you guys like to share what the name of the book is, where people can find it so that they can use this as a resource as well?
Yeah. Real quick, Nikki, can I share one other
Yeah,
thing first before we go?
absolutely.
Because the other thing that's kind of on our mind that we talk a lot about too is when you're not the person who's lost the child, but you're associated with that person and how to
Mm,
support that person
yeah.
from outside looking in, if you will. And something that's kind of important to us is whenever someone comes to me and says, "What can I do for so and so?" when they're dealing with that loss, and I tell them the main thing you can do is pray for them and let them know that you're praying for them, because there's a lot of power in that energy that comes from prayer, and especially when you have a lot of people united in that prayer. I literally felt that energy one day when I was just in a slump. I could feel energy of people's prayers coming to me. Like I started visualizing in my mind, just random people coming to my mind who told me that they were praying for me in a moment where I really needed help and support. And
Yeah.
so that energy out there was a game changer for me. And so if nothing else, pray for them and let them know that you're praying for them. So that way they're aware of
Mhm.
that energy. And then the other thing is Melissa talked about service a little bit, and she has great observation. I don't know if you want to share it, Melissa, talk about your observation with serving other people.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to support someone who's grieving, you go into this fog when you're grieving, and it can be really hard to think of things. And a lot of people come to you and will say, how can I help? What can I do to help? And that's not really helpful because thinking of the things that will help are really difficult. So the better thing to do is say, this is how I'm going to help. Like, if you want to take dinner, say, I would like to bring you dinner if Tuesday or Thursday a better night. Or I want to, I want to do this thing for you. Would it be better if I do it this way or this way? Um, or just even something that really meant a lot to Lawrence was that I had a friend who came and visited us, and he mentioned something that he really liked from the bakery where she worked. And a couple days later, she showed up with that treat for him. And so, even just taking something out of a conversation and showing up is a better way to serve than saying, "How can I serve?" Because, like I said, it's really hard to come up with ways to serve when you don't even know.
Yeah. Or what that person could do, right? You're like, well, you could do this for me, but I don't know if that person can do that
Yeah.
for me. That both of those are great suggestions because I think that is maybe some people are listening to this who know somebody who has lost a child and they want to help and they feel helpless and they don't know what to do. So those are great suggestions. What are your skills and talents that you can give to that person? And I love what you're saying, Melissa. Give an option in that thing, right? Like, I'm bringing you your dinner. Would you like it Tuesday or Thursday? Or I'm going to be doing this. Would you like it this way or this way? That way, they still have the the choice or some say in that, but it's less pressure on that person who already is feeling overwhelmed, not having to come up with something for you to come do
Yeah.
for them.
There's kind of one last thing that we tell people, someone who's grieving, especially the loss of a child. And that last thing is to say that child's name. It can be as simple as saying their name and letting the parents know that you haven't forgotten them. That can really lift and make a big difference for the parents.
I love that because it can feel scary sometimes too. Like, if I'm bringing up their name, am I causing more pain or hurt? Is it hard for them to hear their name? But what you're saying is, no, we want to hear their name.
We haven't forgotten that they're gone.
Something we try to do every year. So Thomas was delivered in September. Ethne's birthday's in November, right? Going into the holidays, and so we did it with Ethne, and now we just kind of incorporate it with both of them combined. But we try to do acts of service related to their birthdays. And for example, in years past, because with our son who was in the NICU, we spent a lot of time at Ronald McDonald House. Melissa especially, she'd stay at the Ronald McDonald House. And so we've gone back and we've served meals to celebrate their birthdays at the Ronald McDonald House. The presents we would typically give them for Christmas, for example, we still buy those and we donate them to usually some kind of foster care program or something like that. And we talk about these acts of service that we're trying to do in memory of them. And we've even gone out and we've fundraised to get other people involved in it. One challenge we did one time was we wanted to get a certain number of ordinances done in the temple. And Melissa and I always wanted to do this, but Melissa and I, we actually did a day where we took a name, we started with baptism and took it all the way through sealing. And that was a really neat experience. And so finding ways to honor the memory of those children has become very important to us. And and so that's one of the things we're doing to try to keep their name alive. But even if you just know someone who's dealing with grief, text them, even just shoot them a text message on the birthday of that child or on the death date of that child to let them know that you're thinking of them. It goes a
Yeah.
long way.
Yeah. Oh, these are beautiful suggestions. I love that. Are all of these suggestions too in your book? Like, do you guys have these in there if people want these resources or to be able to give those resources to somebody else in the book?
Yeah, so I got a copy of it right here.
Oh, perfect.
So, but in the back, we talk about a few things, some of the books and stuff that we use, some of the resources we have. We got a list of all the references we use. I mean, there was organizations that we worked with, like the Share organization, Ronald McDonald House, Children's Miracle Network, really came in for us in a big way. They paid for Ethne's life flight helicopter. I think it was that first night. I remember asking someone in the hospital what it was going to cost because I had no idea how I was going to pay for it, and it was a terrifying thing for me to think about. We were broke. Only a few months prior, we were so broke we'd received a 3-day pay or vacate notice on our apartment. So I had no idea what we were going to do. And the nurse didn't even hesitate. She's like, no, Ronald, she said, Children's Miracle Network already took care of it. So you don't have to think about it. I mean, it was just
Wow.
done and it was amazing. So we put some of the books we listened to, different things that really helped us out in getting through it. We list them there.
Wow. That sounds like a wealth of knowledge in that book. Now tell us the name of your book.
Our stories. And we put that parenthetical S because even though we were experiencing the same loss, it was two different stories. we're self-published through Amazon. So if you go type our stories in Amazon, it's going to give you a long list of books that aren't ours. So type in Lawrence or Melissa Stone, and that'll bring it right to the top.
Perfect. And we'll link that actual Amazon link in the show notes so you guys can access that right away and be able to find that, because that book sounds like a great resource for anybody that, and maybe just have that as something that you can give to somebody as well. So thank
Yeah.
you for writing it.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, if anyone out there even has, like, they have groups and we can come and visit and talk to people, we would love to kind of help people and share with people and interact with people, because we wrote it because we want to help people deal with their grief, and even if it's not necessarily child loss, just grief in general, and
Okay.
help their marriage stay together and just keep going forward through the trials.
Okay. We'll put your contact information in the show notes then as well. So if you guys want Lawrence and Melissa to come speak at something, or you know somebody that you'd like them to talk to, we can do that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you coming on the episode, and I can't wait for people to get this wealth of knowledge that you guys have.
Thanks for having us.